In this last recording, I'm going to tell you where these interpretations came from. Why should you believe these? If you've read my books, you know I don't believe stuff. I spent a lot of chapters trying to do stuff in theory because I need to understand it myself before you just tell me that this asteroid means whatever it means. Let me show you the main thing that did a lot of the work. Now, first of all, like I said, I looked at a bunch of people and I had their asteroids. And then I basically said, okay, whoever has the conjunct, what are they like? And so I looked at Valletta in 800 people's charts. And I said, who has the conjunct to the north node and the midheaven? Because those are the more ongoing. And I got that the cluster of people who had that tended to have this issue, right? Again, this is why these interpretations are very anthropomorphic. They're very human related. Voluptuousness, for example, is like, well, how did, who has that? It was the cluster of people who had Sila Nunam conjunct the north node and the midheaven. And it wasn't just conjunct, it was sextile and all that. But as far as formally interpreting these things, this is the program that finished the interpretations. So I did a lot of stuff. Like I text mine and reduced it to a vocabulary of 15,000 possible words. And here are some of the files that were involved in that. Famous Orbit K, for example, is a group of people. I put my own chart in there, but the rest of these guys are from Astro Data Bank. And these are all asteroids at the top. Again, I wish I could blow this up for you, but I can't. These are a bunch of ones and zeros. They're binary. And what they're saying is, was 1998 UX conjunct, opposite, sextile, or trine the sun, or the moon, or Mercury, or Mars, or Venus, or Jupiter, or the north node, or the fortune. I used 18 of these, part of fortune included, ascendant included, whatever. And whenever there was one of those easy aspects, the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 6s, conjuncts, oppositions, trines, and sextiles, then I put a 1. And if it wasn't, then I didn't. So then what I did is took these columns of whoever had these relationships with every particular asteroid. And there's Eva, there's your enemy, and there you go. I took that and I combined it with the people who were in Astro Data Bank and their indexes, joined them against the word appearance vectors. Right? So the 12-step group label from Astro Data Bank had these people who were marked as having that trait. The folks who had 15 minutes of fame had these people who were marked as having that trait. Apparently there were 66 of them. The feminists and activists, there were 176 of them out of 62,000 folks. And these were the people, at least their indexes, who had them. Then what I did, and here's the main research. I joined those two together. And so let me see if I can show what this was. Okay. I looked at every word, all 15,000. The last word in my dictionary is Zui. And I said, who had the word in their wiki as one of the chi-squared keyword analysis keywords from their wiki bio or from their Astro Data Bank label? There were the few who had it, and then there were the many who didn't have it. They didn't have that word as a keyword in their bio. And I asked myself whether this distribution of zeros and ones was statistically different from this distribution of zeros and ones. And that is subject to a non-parametric test called the Kruskal-Wallis test right here. Do the groups that had the keyword versus not having the keyword differ on the families of conjuncts, sextiles, trines between whatever asteroid and the sun and the moon and Mercury and whatever. And I did it over and over and over. It's a level of 3 loops. And the results of the Kruskal-Wallis test produce this kind of thing, right? So it goes asteroid combination by asteroid combination, person by person, word by word, and it literally took 9 months to run off and on. I'd turn on my computer, I'd run in, I'd do some work, and leave it in the background. Sometimes I had to turn my computer off. It took 9 months to finish this. The p-value for this one, that is statistical significance on this one, is 0.18. So that means there's an 18 or 19% chance that the results of this distribution were random. Random is, that's a high chance of randomness. So that's no good. So that's the end of that. But as it goes through the loop, it keeps the distributions which were different by 1/10,000. So the label says that the p-values need to be less than 1/1000. It's actually 1/10,000 because I was getting too many statistically significant results. There is a 1 in 10,000 chance that these that made it were random. Clytemnestra Saturn. Apparently, Clytemnestra has a statistically significant relationship to one of those words with Saturn, right? So that meant that word versus not the word, probably is we, differed, and it was in less than a 1 in 10,000 chance that it was random between Clytemnestra and Saturn. So I then took all those guys and piled them up over the course of repeated trials here, and I ended up with the results for Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra was statistically significant with these keywords against these key planets. And looks like birth of state or country popped up quite a bit. Anyways, so they're all, as I said, statistically significant at less than 1 in 10,000 randomness. So, I didn't keep anything that was more than 1 in 10,000 randomness, not in this round. And it produces these files that basically show this. And then I do a bunch of post-processing to see what the most statistically significant subgroups were. And let's see what came out of it. Clytemnestra is associated with queen treatment, queen-like treatment, at least in the overt sense. And these are some of the words that came out for the ascendant. The ascendant actually is not as significant as the node and the midheaven, because the ascendant is where you're going to new places. But most of your life is not spent going to new places. It's spent having a reputation and belonging where you belong. And so a lot of these other things are hit and miss. And I found in earlier research that the north node and the midheaven, they tell more about how likely you are to manifest something, and they line up more with my original 800 clustering of people. The role of queens, you see, we've got guardians and servants and violence and custody. These are all queen-like things. And then, of course, there's some other stuff with the midheaven, things like that. But, and like I said, you may ask, well, why didn't you compare each asteroid to Mercury or the moon or Mars? I actually did, but the main basis of the bigger interpretations was the node and the midheaven. So anyway, the results of this, it went crazy, and you ended up with stuff like this. Let me show you the asteroid Valletta to give you an example of what the kind of final outcome of all this was. Valletta is associated with corruption of a certain kind, as you saw, and here it is right here, right? Exploitation and corruption and all of that other stuff. This is when I observed the people, and again, my observing is kind of a midheaven act, and what they're doing and where they belong is kind of a nodal act. And so you could say, well, this research is biased because it was your observation and it was not their personal account, and you would be correct. It was your observation, and it was not their emotional EEG scanning, so you couldn't have gotten their mood. That would be correct as well, right? So it shows you some of the limitations of the current state of astro research. But there's no doubt that you can definitely do analysis and use p-values on it. These were text mined, right? Like I had a robot running these guys while I was doing other things. And so, if it's hogwashy, blame the Kruskal-Wallis test and the non-parametric statistics for it. Don't blame me. So I'm going to go back to this one. I'm going to show you what Valletta had. And here's the Valletta file. The words that came out of it, oh gosh, didn't need to click on that. The words that came out of it, as far as subgroup blends, were all of these words, right? And so you had different things, different words associated with the different major asteroids and whatnot. And that was the first round of research. But, and again, this is like H values and stuff like that. I didn't put the P values because the P values here they're actually the top of this group. So I just stacked them and then took the top 20. There was no need to put the P values there. But here's the rest of the Valletta file. Now, I had my old interpretations, and these are the ones that you'll find in Laurentia. The new interpretations were done like full-on text mining. Like I got my stuff together in terms of how to get the robot to read from WordNet and Python and do all that. So here's the new interpretation of Valletta. So note that, let me show you the old one. You note that if I go in here, there's another file which I won't tax your brain with because it's very complicated. But this file did a couple of tests. It did a Pearson correlation on certain topics. It did an analysis of variance on the both signs to see if there were statistically significant differences among people who had Valletta in Aquarius, Valletta in Aries, Valletta in Cancer, and so on. And then there was the regular non-parametric test, the Kruskal-Wallis, and I have all of their p-values here. I didn't cut it off at 1/10,000th here because it was text mined, and the text mining works a little bit differently than the original test. But these are the words that came out in order. I sorted them by the number of times that they appeared out of 8 documents. So I had 8 documents total. And so to appear with statistical significance in one document is one thing, but to appear in 2 or 3 is a bigger thing. It says, look, no matter what sample of 8,000 you draw, this thing is going to appear statistically significant in at least 2 of them. And that's actually a big deal considering astrology is supposed to be bullshit. So anyway, like even these are all like statistically significant. But so 2 documents comes first, ascending p-value comes next. And here is the most significant word for Valletta, now. The second most significant word in my vocabulary of 15,000 is careful, then unique, then brilliant. And so then, and I also included people who had Valletta with these particular factors. And these are the folks who featured more highly with Valletta in their chart. Maybe they perhaps had a little bit of eccentricity associated with them, or certainly there is a Uranian kind of character to these people. If you just know who these people are, but if you didn't know who these people are, here was their bio, right? This is who they were. This is who they were. This is where they had Valletta. It's their name, how many conjuncts, and so on. Why did I use these and not use others? I found that the others were not statistically significant enough and not informative enough. So believe it or not, having Valletta's sun didn't tell you much because you were always using your sun and it was harder to statistically separate it out. But these tended to actually translate into things. So last thing I did is show who, so I made sentences out of this in order. And this would be a good place for a robot to kind of take over. I don't know how to use NLTK on that level, for natural language to create sentences out of this, so I'm currently creating them by hand. Here's the sentence. Now carrying uniquely a brilliant rise with fellows almost granted away from war, the creative occasion for moving many holes. And here are those words in that order, basically, right about there. So then I was like, well, what does that mean? And I tried to translate it. It seems to be related to a moment passing through the outer boundaries of a conflict. You're just getting out of the escape zone of a conflict. And that's what Valletta is. How does that translate into corruption? Well, it's not always direct, but think about a person who is just getting out of an escape zone of a conflict. They're in the conflict right now, and they're like just on the edge of not being in a conflict. How do they look to you? Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. But this is where my interpretations came from. I was going to pull up my astro stuff, but apparently I have closed my website. So I'll just say that, this is where the newer versions of these came from. The older versions were sampled on people. The newer versions were sampled on text mining. I have not seen that the newer text mining conflicts with the older ones. The older ones seem to be the physical results of the newer ones. But just in case you weren't inclined to believe these interpretations, if you go on my website to electricmonastery.com, let me pull that back up, then you'll find for the asteroids that, here we go, you'll find for the asteroids that the ones that are higher than 1,000 tend to have semicolons in them. Those were generated by the text mining almost exclusively, but they've got the old interpretations attached to them, if there's some of the newer ones as well. So yeah, these were robot generated. These were kind of people generated, and sometimes they have the robot generation attached. So like this one here, this is the old interpretation. This is the text mine interpretation of Eternatus. I haven't finished them all, so there you have it. But yeah, that is kind of an introduction to what I call statistical astrology. It's definitely worth probably explaining more about in the future.